He was 4 years old. He weighed 38 pounds. He had a small birthmark behind his left ear, shaped in the loose way of small things, like a bird, his 9-year-old sister said. Like a flying bird, and she said it to every detective and every investigator and every caseworker who asked her about her brother for the next 46 years. Because it was the detail she could hold on to, the detail that was his and nobody else's, the detail that would still be there if she ever found him. On the morning of March 15, 1978, Marcus Webb was playing on the climbing structure at Selwood Park in Portland, Oregon, while his mother sat on a bench 12 feet away. She had looked away for less than a minute to read a note she had pulled from her coat pocket, a reminder she had written herself about a dentist appointment. And when she looked back up, the climbing structure was empty. That is not a story about a toddler who wandered off in a park. That is a story about a man who spent 46 years living inside a history that was not his. Not knowing he had a mother who kept his room the way she had left it. Not knowing he had a sister who described a birthmark to strangers for 4.5 decades. Not knowing that 12 feet away, in the moment she looked down at a piece of paper, a life had been interrupted that she would spend the rest of hers trying to restore. It would take 46 years, a dead man's photograph, a name written on the back of a Polaroid in handwriting nobody recognized, and a piece of technology that did not exist until recently to finally tell Marcus Webb who he was. But before any of that, you have to understand who he was to begin with. You have to go back to Portland, and to the park, and to the family the morning left behind. Portland in 1978 was a city at the beginning of a long reinvention, caught between its industrial working-class history and whatever it was becoming, still shaped by the timber industry, still smelling of the Willamette River on warm days, its neighborhoods distinct from each other in the way of cities that grew along waterways rather than grids. The Selwood neighborhood, where the Webb family lived, was a quiet residential area of craftsman houses and corner stores, and the particular Pacific Northwest combination of Douglas fir and persistent gray sky that residents described not as dreary, but as the correct color for thinking. Kenneth Webb was a civil engineer with the city. Sandra Webb had worked as a reference librarian at the Multnomah County Library until Marcus was born, and had taken a leave that had extended itself in the natural way of leaves taken when a second child arrives and the mathematics of daycare do not work in your favor. She intended to go back. She had plans. She had a list of the new reference materials she wanted to request when she returned. Joanna was 9 years old. Serious, observant, the kind of older child who had already developed the habit of noticing things about her environment and storing them. She had been in school the morning Marcus disappeared. She would carry the guilt of not having been there for a decade before she worked out, with the help of a school counselor and then a therapist, and then just time. That 9-year-olds in school on a Wednesday morning are not responsible for what happens at a park 2 blocks away. Marcus was 4. He had recently mastered the climbing structure at Selwood Park, which he approached with the methodical determination of a child who has decided something is worth doing and will do it as many times as necessary until it is done correctly. He had a vocabulary his pediatrician had described at his last well-child visit as advanced for his age, and a tendency, noted by everyone who knew him, to ask questions in sequences, not one question and then waiting for the answer, but a chain of questions, each one following from the previous, the way small children do when they are genuinely trying to understand something rather than just be heard. He had a birthmark behind his left ear. His sister had named it a bird. He was too young to know it was there. Sandra Webb had been a librarian. She believed in the importance of writing things down. She had a notebook in her coat pocket that morning in which she had written, Among other things, the dentist appointment reminder and a grocery list, and on the inside front cover, in her careful reference librarian's handwriting, the names and ages and physical descriptions of both her children. The way she had seen recommended in a parenting magazine, on the theory that in an emergency a parent might be too frightened to remember details they needed to give to police. She had written Marcus's description. She had written, small birthmark behind left ear, like a bird. She had written it down so she would never forget it. She never forgot it anyway. The note she had pulled from her pocket that morning, the dentist reminder, took less than a minute to read. She had looked up. The climbing structure was empty. She had scanned the park. She had called his name once, then twice, then in the way that mothers call a child's name when something is wrong, which is a different sound entirely, and anyone within range of it knows immediately what it means. He was gone. Sandra ran to every corner of Selwood Park in under 3 minutes. She stopped a man walking a dog and described Marcus. She ran to the nearest house and knocked and asked to use the phone. The homeowner, a retired teacher named Vera Klassen, let her in without hesitation and called the Portland Police Bureau at 9:41. Officers arrived at 10:02. By 10:30, the park and surrounding streets were being canvassed. By noon, Joanna was home from school and sitting in the kitchen with her grandmother, understanding from the specific quality of the adult silence around her that something had happened that was not going to be easily fixed. The investigation produced 2 significant early leads. The first was a witness, a woman walking her child to the park from the opposite direction, who reported seeing a man carrying a small boy toward the parking area on the park's north side at approximately 9:30. She described the man as tall, lean, approximately 40, with light brown hair. She described the boy as not struggling. She had assumed it was a father and son. The second lead was a partial boot print in the soft mud near the parking area's north edge, consistent with a men's size 11 work boot, photographed and cataloged. Neither lead resolved into anything actionable. The man with the boy was never identified. The boot print was never matched. The Portland Police Bureau's investigation was thorough and well-resourced for its era. What it did not have, what no investigation in 1978 had, was a national database of missing children, a computerized record-sharing system between jurisdictions, or any mechanism for flagging a 4-year-old boy appearing in a new community under a different name. Raymond Dorn had moved from Portland to Coos Bay within a week of March 15th, traveling Highway 18 to the coast, arriving in a city 250 miles away where nobody knew him. Nobody knew Marcus, and a man with a small child was not a remarkable sight. The institutional failure of the Marcus Webb investigation was not negligence. It was the era. 1978 was 6 years before the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children existed, 18 years before the Amber Alert system existed, and 45 years before facial recognition technology could be applied to old photographs against missing children databases. Every tool that might have found Marcus was built after he had already been hidden. The lead investigator was a Portland PD detective named Frank Okafor, no relation to the GB agent in Emma Cole's case, who worked the Webb case for 4 years before transferring to a different unit. He gave his personal notes to the next detective, and that detective gave them to the next. And for 46 years the case was handed forward the way certain things are handed forward. Not because anyone expected a resolution, but because putting it down entirely was not something anyone was willing to do. Sandra Webb drove to the Selwood Park parking area on March 15th of every year. She sat in her car and looked at the north edge of the lot where the boot print had been. She did not get out. She did not do anything particular. She just went. because going was the only form of not giving up that remained available to her after the active searching was done. Kenneth went with her for the first 20 years. After he died in 2015, Joanna went. They sat in the car together and looked at the lot, and then they drove back to Sandra's house and had dinner and talked about Marcus. What they remembered, what Joanna remembered, the questions Marcus used to ask in sequences, the bird behind his left ear. Every year, without exception. By 1990, 12 years had passed. Joanna was 21, studying at University of Oregon, carrying the case in the way that children of missing siblings carry things, not as the primary grief, which belonged to her parents, but as a permanent secondary weight that shaped how she moved through the world. She had a habit of noticing small children in public and unconsciously cataloging their features. She could not stop doing it. She had stopped trying to stop. By 2000, 22 years. Marcus, living as Caleb Dorn in Coos Bay, was 26 years old. He was working at a marine repair yard and had recently married a woman named Tessa, and he had the particular competence with mechanical systems that his co-workers described the way people describe gifts they haven't thought to question, as simply who he is, as if he arrived that way. He had no memory of his life before approximately age 6 or 7, which Raymond Dorn had explained as the result of a difficult early period he preferred not to discuss. Marcus, Caleb, had not pushed. There was nothing in his daily life that made the explanation feel insufficient. He had a father who had raised him, a half-brother named Derek who was 3 years older and with whom he was close, and a life that was proceeding. He had once, in his mid-20s, tried to look up his birth mother. The woman Raymond had told him had died young. The name Raymond had given was common enough that the search produced nothing useful, and Marcus had concluded the records were simply not findable, and had let it go. He had not known that the name was invented. He had not known there was anything to find. By 2010, 32 years, Sandra Webb was 66. The NCMEC had Marcus's case in their database with a forensic age progression image showing what a 36-year-old Marcus might look like. Joanna had looked at the image so many times she had memorized it. She said it looked like Kenneth, their father. She said, "He has Dad's eyes in it. Whether he does in reality, I don't know. I hope so." Raymond Dorn died in March 2022 at the age of 86 at the house in Coos Bay where he had lived since 1978. He left the house to Marcus, to Caleb, and a storage unit in town to his biological son Derek. The storage unit, Derek was told, contained old business records and personal effects from Raymond's earlier life in Portland. Derek Dorn went to the storage unit in January 2023 to begin clearing it. Every case we cover takes weeks to piece together from records, testimony, and the years families spent refusing to let a name disappear. If this work matters to you, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Marcus. The storage unit held what Derek expected. Old business records, tools, a rolled carpet, 3 boxes of paperwork. And at the bottom of the third box, wrapped in a cloth that had once been a kitchen towel, a smaller box. Inside, a collection of Polaroid photographs from the late 1970s. Derek recognized some of them. His father as a younger man, a house in Portland he vaguely remembered from early childhood, and among them, a Polaroid of a small boy, approximately 3 or 4 years old, sitting on a climbing structure in a park. The boy was wearing a red jacket. He was smiling at the camera. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting Derek did not recognize as his father's, 2 words, Marcus. Mine. Derek turned the photograph over and looked at the boy again. Then, he turned it back. Then he did what any person does in 2023 when they encounter something they cannot explain. He took a photograph of it with his phone and ran it through a facial recognition application against publicly available databases. The application returned a result in under 4 minutes. The result was a NCMEC listing for a missing child from Portland, Oregon, missing since March 15, 1978. Name: Marcus Webb. Age at disappearance: 4 years old. Derek Dorn sat in the storage unit for a long time. Then he called his half-brother. He said, "Caleb, I need to tell you something. I don't know how to tell you this." He said, "I think I know who you are." The Oregon Department of Justice Cold Case Unit received Derek's contact on a Wednesday in January 2023. The investigator assigned was Special Agent Renata Flores, 42 years old, who had worked the Webb case file once before, 2 years earlier, as part of a routine review. She remembered the birthmark notation. She had noted it then as the kind of detail that would either mean everything or nothing, depending on whether the case ever moved. She drove to Coos Bay that Friday. She sat across from a 50-year-old man with a marine mechanic's hands and a careful, deliberate manner that she would later describe, in her case notes, as remarkably similar to the description of Marcus Webb at 4. A child who asked questions in sequences, who approached problems methodically, who had his father's eyes. She asked if she could look behind his left ear. He lifted his hair. The birthmark was there. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Dorn, I need to tell you about a family in Portland." The DINA confirmation came 10 days later, processed on a priority basis by the Oregon State Police Forensic Laboratory. The result confirmed that Marcus, Caleb, was the biological son of Kenneth and Sandra Webb, and the biological sibling of Joanna Webb Park. The probability of any other interpretation was, the forensic report noted, not statistically distinguishable from 0. Joanna Webb Park received the call from Agent Flores on a Tuesday morning. She was 55 years old. She had been describing a birthmark shaped like a flying bird to investigators for 46 years. She said only one thing before Flores had finished speaking. She said, "Is it still there? The birthmark. Is it still there?" Flores told her, "Yes, it's still there." Joanna said, "I knew it. I always knew exactly what to look for." The meeting between Sandra Webb and her son took place on a Saturday in March 2023, 45 years and 2 weeks after the morning, at Selwood Park. Sandra was 80 years old. She had driven to that parking lot every March 15th for 46 years. She had written her children's descriptions in a notebook on the theory that in an emergency you might be too frightened to remember. She had never needed the notebook for Joanna. She had needed it for Marcus. And the detail she had written down had waited 46 years to be confirmed. Marcus drove from Coos Bay to Portland alone. He had asked Tessa if she wanted to come, and she had said, "This is yours first." She would meet the family later. This was his. He stood on Sandra's front porch, and she opened the door, and they looked at each other. And she said, "You have your father's eyes." He said, "I've been told that." She said, "Come inside. There's a lot to tell you." He went inside. Joanna was there. She reached up immediately, without asking, and lifted the hair behind his left ear. She looked at the birthmark for a moment. Then she looked at him and said, "I described you for 46 years. I never stopped describing you." He said, "What did you say?" She said, "I said you had a birthmark behind your left ear, like a flying bird." He reached back and touched the spot. He had never paid particular attention to it. He said, "I didn't know that was there." She said, "I did." Raymond Dorn was deceased. The Oregon Department of Justice's investigation into the 1978 abduction produced sufficient evidence to conclude that Raymond Dorn had been responsible, including records placing him in Portland on March 15, 1978. Boot impressions consistent with his shoe size recovered from old crime scene photographs and compared to boots found in his storage unit. And the Polaroid itself, the photograph of Marcus, labeled in handwriting that Sandra Webb identified, through a comparison conducted by a forensic document examiner, as her own. She had written Marcus's name on that photograph. She had taken it herself, at that same park, weeks before he was taken. Raymond Dorn had taken her photograph of her son. The finding was formally closed in August 2023. Derek Dorn cooperated fully with the investigation throughout. He has said publicly that he is still working through what he knows, that the man who raised him with genuine care was also a man who had taken a child from his family and constructed a lie that lasted 46 years. He has said, "I don't have a clean way to feel about that yet. I'm not sure I ever will." He and Marcus have remained in contact. That, too, is a complexity that does not resolve cleanly, and both men have said they are not trying to force it to. Marcus Webb, he uses both names now. Marcus for his history and Caleb for his daily life. The way a person keeps both the river and the sea, has said in the single public statement he has made that the hardest part is the 4-year-old he cannot remember. He said, "I can't go back and comfort him. I can't tell him what's coming, that it turns out to be a life, that people love him. He doesn't know that yet and I can't reach him. That's the part I sit with." He visits Portland now. He has learned, from Sandra and Joanna, who he was before he became who he is. He has learned about the sequences of questions he used to ask. He has learned that he could draw before he could write clearly. He has learned that his father had the same eyes. He asked Joanna on his second visit to show him the climbing structure at Selwood Park. They drove there on a Sunday afternoon. It has been replaced. New equipment, new surfacing. The whole park updated twice since 1978. But the parking area on the north side is still in the same location. He stood at the edge of it for a while, looking at the space where a boot print had been photographed and never matched, where a man had walked with a small boy and been mistaken for a father. He said to Joanna, "Do you come here?" She said, "Mom does. Every year on March 15th. She sits in the car and looks at the lot." He said, "Does she know I'm coming back with her this year?" Joanna said, "She's been hoping since August." He said, "Good. Let's go tell her." Marcus Webb was 4 years old. He had a bird-shaped birthmark behind his left ear and a habit of asking questions in sequences, and a mother who wrote his description in a notebook so she would never forget it. And she never did, and 46 years later the description was still accurate, and the birthmark was still there. The Oregon Department of Justice has since recommended to the NCMEC that all cold missing children cases predating 1990 be systematically cross-referenced with the facial recognition capabilities now available through law enforcement partnerships with commercial platforms on an annual basis as database coverage expands. The recommendation cites the Webb case and the Emma Cole case in Georgia as parallel examples of resolution achieved through technology that postdates the original investigations by 4 decades. Sandra Webb drives to Selwood Park every March 15th. She will drive there this year. This year, Marcus will be in the car. What does it mean to know who you are only in retrospect? To have lived a full life and then discover that its first chapter belongs to someone else's story as well as your own? Derek Dorn loved a man who committed a serious wrong. Marcus was raised by that same man with genuine care. What do we do with love that is real and also built on something taken? And when you think about Joanna Webb Park describing a birthmark shaped like a flying bird to investigators for 46 years, never once wavering on that detail. What does that kind of patient, Specific, unrelenting love tell us about what we owe the people we cannot stop looking for. Marcus Webb came home after 46 years. His story reminds us that some things, once written down, cannot be lost. Not a birthmark, not a name on the back of a photograph, not a detail a 9-year-old girl decided was worth remembering forever. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More cases are waiting in the description. Thank you for being here.